Hey everybody, it's Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini. Welcome to episode number 196 of WIP Wednesday, which is my weekly live show here on Wednesdays, where I'm usually coming to y'all with some type of a demo, a review, tutorial, some news, all of that stuff. Today we are going to be doing a demo, but before we get started on today's show, let's pop into the chat and make sure that y'all can see me and hear me. Very important. So let's see. Okay, we got almost 50 people on already, so welcome everybody. Let's see who we have in the house. Hi, Star, tuning in from cold southeast South Dakota. She says, hey, Margie, tuning in from Wisconsin. Mary's in the house from Michigan. Hi, Ann, tuning in from Ottawa, Canada. Hey, Kathleen from Atlanta. All right, awesome. Hi, Claudia. Thanks for tuning in from North Carolina. Thank you, Heather, for letting me know that it looks and sounds good. And Heather's coming to us from California. So I'm coming to y'all from my home crafting studio here in North Central Florida. And I feel my mascara eyelashes sticking together. Okay, from North Central Florida, where it's probably still like 50-some degrees out there, even with the sun out. It was nice and chilly this morning in the 40s. All right, good. Welcome everybody who is just tuning in. I have missed y'all, last week? And I think the week before too, huh? Or did I come to y'all the week before? I don't know. But when we get to this time of year, all kinds of stuff is going on Wednesdays, okay? So apologies for any missed WIP Wednesday episodes. I always send out an email just to let y'all know if it's canceled, if it's not going on Wednesday that week, or if we're moving it for some reason. Sometimes we do that, especially during hurricane season, but we got lucky this year. Not a one hurricane in Florida. Fingers crossed that next year is the same. All right, so we are going to get started with today's demo, and it is a fleece project. I don't know about y'all, but I used to have a huge collection of fleece from Joann's. That anti-pill fleece and the blizzard fleece, and I am missing my Joann's because I teach after-school crafts to kids of all ages, right? And coming up on these colder months, I wanted to do a fleece project with them, so we whipped up, super simple one layer of fleece hats. And because it only takes me, I can make one in probably 5 minutes. It's something good that you can do with a big class of kids. So I was able to teach, I think we did 18 or 19 kids were able to make it with 2 sewing machines in 1 hour, like just under 1 hour. So if you're someone who teaches kids, or maybe you're gonna be spending time this holiday season with grandkids or other younger kids in the family, and you kind of wanna introduce them to sewing, or they've been begging to learn how to sew, I think this is gonna be a great, super simple project that it's not gonna have you wanting to yank out your hair, because if you've ever tried to teach a kid to sew, or a beginner, you already know you have to tap into every ounce of patience that has ever existed in your life in order to get them to the end, right? The finished project, so that they can feel excited and enthusiastic to continue sewing. So as a teacher, that is what I like to teach, is quick wins, things that, especially the younger kids, we can still hold on to their attention and get them to finish something, right? Once you start getting a little bit more advanced, especially teaching slightly older kids, they hate how much prep there is in sewing. And so you spend half the class like, when do we get to sew? When are we gonna sew? And it's like, not anytime soon. You still gotta prep, trace, cut out your templates, prep your fabric, iron and do all of that. So this, because it's fleece, and we know fleece doesn't really fray, it's a super quick make. So let's go ahead and give everybody my over-the-shoulder camera shot here so I can show you first the hat. I did go ahead, because it's such a quick make, and I made a little reel video, like a short form, vertical form video, and I did post it to my Facebook page, which is Crafty Gemini, the Crafty Gemini Shorts YouTube channel page, my TikTok, which is the Crafty Gemini, and also Instagram. So anywhere on social media, pretty much, you can find this video as one of my most recent posts. And the video is pretty much going viral. It has almost 1 million views in less than a week. So I think it's something that a lot of people are saving and sharing with their friends, like, this is a quickie way to do it. If you like to make fleece hats during the cold months to give out, right, for different community service projects, charity stuff, and things like that, this is a really affordable way to do it, because we're only using 1 layer of fleece. So you're saving money on that. I do have other fleece hats, and so I'll just take a moment to mention those. If you want one that is fully finished and doesn't have raw edges, we'll talk a little bit about how this one comes together in a second. But if you want one that's fully lined, maybe you live in a super northern climate and it's really cold, and you want one that's fully lined, I did go ahead and include my link to a video tutorial that I did ages ago, where you can download the free PDF template for my reversible fleece beanie, and that may be a better option for you. If you have plenty of fleece or you want to do like a 2-color reversible option, you can check that link in the description box below. These ones, like I said, is just a quick make so that kids can get them done. And yesterday, we made some of these last week with an after-school program, and yesterday we went back a week later, and there was one kid that was wearing the hat. And I'm like, you wore it today because it was chilly? He's like, I've been wearing this hat every single day. So even the little kids love to make it. They feel super proud of their homemade hats. And if you're wondering how many seams it only takes 1 seam to sew. So if you're teaching little kids, you're going to be good. I mean, even 5-year-olds have been successfully able to make this. So this is an adult size one. This is a kid size one. I included the dimensions, at least the ones that I do, like how I make and how I teach the kids. I included the dimensions in the video description box as well. You can play around with those dimensions a little bit, okay? You'll notice that I put in parentheses in the dimensions kind of like a rough estimate for the head circumference for you to know what to cut out. So for example, the kids, this guy, the way that I started off with the 1 piece of fleece is that I recommend for a kid, like a school age kid that has approximately a 20-inch circumference measurement for their head, I recommend that you start off with a rectangular piece that measures 13.5, which is this dimension, by 20, which is the dimension around the circumference, okay? So notice I said for about a 20-inch circumference of their head, we're cutting the fabric at 20. Some of you might be wondering, why are we cutting at the same measurement? Well, we want it to stay on their heads, right? And so after we eat up the seam allowance, it's going to be a little bit smaller than the 20-inch circumference, even if their head measures exactly 20, because we're going to cut the fabric so that the stretchiest direction, or the direction of greatest stretch of the fabric, crosswise grain, okay, is going to be running around the circumference. So you can see on this finished sample, it stretches in that direction. So even if the kid has like a 20.5-inch head circumference, or even a 21-inch, they'll still be able to get it on their head. So don't feel like it needs to be super perfect. We have a little bit of wiggle room here because the fleece stretches as long as you cut it in the correct stretch direction, okay? Because in this way, you can see it doesn't really stretch much. So if you mistakenly cut the circumference of the head measurement in this direction, it's going to fit snug, okay? So don't make that mistake. And I'll pull out a piece of fleece in a second and show you exactly how you can tell, okay? For the adults, I recommend for an adult with a 23-inch head circumference that we cut out a piece of fabric that measures 15 inches, which is the height, so a little bit taller, by 22. So slightly smaller than that 23-inch head circumference, but again, the fabric stretches in this direction, so you'll be able to get more, okay? Or get it over a slightly bigger head circumference. Okay. Pam says, I love the hats, so quick and easy. She taught a 9-year-old how to make them. Yay! I love to hear that. All right. And it's important when you're teaching little kids to give them projects that they can complete quick without losing, the excitement, or without their attention just like drifting away and they're like, yeah, I'm over this sewing thing. This is not for me. So you definitely want to do stuff like this. So just in a couple minutes, boom, boom, and they can start showing it off to their parents. All right. So now let's start with the fabric. Well, I guess let me do a little overview of what it looks like. So we have 1 layer of fleece. Okay. The bottom edge is completely raw. The top comes together, like tied together, to give it kind of like a fringy pom-pom on the top. So this is not a separate piece, it's part of it, okay? On the back, you have 1 seam that's running down the center back, and I position it at the center back. You don't have to. You can put the seam on the side if you want to, but because there's only 1 seam and I send it to the back, you'll see why in a minute once we start making it, okay? And then the bottom edge, because it is completely raw, there is a raw seam here. If you want to double fold it up, okay, to create like a brim at the bottom, know that the dimensions that I gave you in the video description account for that height. So that's why it's even longer. So if you're low on fleece, but you don't necessarily want to do like a double folded brim, then you could play around with the height dimensions to make it a little less tall than what I did, right? I made it a little bit taller so that we could account for this double fold here. And in that video, I did go ahead and say, like, if you don't like that it has a raw seam on the back, don't make it. Not necessarily don't make it, but this, like I said at the beginning, is for a quick make, for a kid, for a beginner, if you're doing a bunch of hats that you're going to give out to the community, things like that, and you just want to get it done. I think this is absolutely fine. For those of you that are more experienced sewists, y'all already know by looking at this, there's a million and one things that we could do in order to get this seam to not be raw, okay? For me, I don't have a problem with this, especially for kids. They don't know the difference. Like, it doesn't matter to them. It's not going to unravel. It's not going to fray at all. It just stays exactly where it is. And I have that seam going towards the center back. So that little bit of the double folded up brim, the little bit of raw seam that you see here is on the back side as well. But if you read through the comments, like I said, the video, the little tutorial has almost 1 million views. There's, I mean, thousands probably of suggestions. You could put a bow. You can finish the raw edges off down the whole seam here. So when you flip it up, it's fine. Some people suggested you can fold it in and under, okay? And then top stitch it so you don't have any raw seams. You could do a French seam. To me, I don't know that a French seam makes much sense for me personally because it's still gonna be like a bulky seam. And because this doesn't fray, to me, it's like the same thing. So there's a million different ways to do it. If you are an experienced sewist, you already know what you can do, okay, to change this up. But we're not going to be going over that. Just know that there's a lot of different ways to do it. Some of the kids, actually the kid that I was talking about that was wearing it yesterday, that he said he'd been wearing it every day, he didn't even have it double folded at the brim. He was just wearing it just like this. So that's another option, okay? But you could, and I'll show you, mine, I leave them like this so that the kids can choose how they're going to wear it. By double folding it, you can double fold it, and once you put it on, that brim is not really going anywhere, but you can choose to top stitch this in place as well. So if you're going to go with like maybe flipping it underneath one time like this, or even 2 times so you get it a little bit bulkier, and I'm just winging it, you could go in here and top stitch that turned under. Then you wouldn't have any raw seam and you would still have the shortened height with a little chunkier of a brim. So again, a million different ways to do this stuff, okay? Hi Zena, thanks for tuning in. She says, it was so nice to meet you at the Makers Market over the weekend. That's right. Thank you to everybody who came out this weekend to shop at our first annual Crafty Gemini Makers Market that we had here in our North Central Florida little town of Alachua, Florida. Zena came by. I hope you already started using your new sewing machine, Zena. Speaking of which, the sewing machine I'm going to be using today for the demo, we do still have some in stock, and we have them on sale. So the link is in the video description box. You may want to check that out. If you've been watching my videos for any length of time, you know what machine it is. Okay, so let's see. Oh yeah, Marnie says this would be so cute with snowflakes embroidered on. And so let's talk a little bit about that. If you start off, okay, remember the dimensions for kids and adult sizes, the ones that I recommend, are in the video description box. This is let me see. I was about to say adult, but then I'm like, let me check. No, this one is kind of in between. So the height is the kid's height, but the length is, oh no, it is a kid's one. I thought the length was the adult length. Anyways, this measures 13.5 inches by 20, which is the recommended measurements that I suggest you cut it out at for a kid size, okay? Or even, you know, like a smaller, more petite adult with a smaller head, that's fine. Remember I said there's going to be stretch going along this or around the circumference. So let's have a look at how I cut this fabric, okay? Yes, you're cutting a rectangle. But we know when it comes to grain lines of fleece, one direction stretches a lot more than the other. So if you're familiar with knit fabrics or cotton wovens, like quilting cottons, you probably already know lengthwise and crosswise grain. You need to cut this fleece fabric so that the length of the rectangle, meaning the longest dimension, right? We have one dimension this way, and then we have one this way. The longest dimension has to be running along the stretchiest direction of the fabric. Does that make sense? So notice when I pull, it stretches. And that is my 20-inch dimension. I need that 20 to be going long and stretchy, okay? In other words, I could not have cut 20 going this way because look, there's not much give, and that means we're going to have a struggle to try and get it over somebody's head. The longest dimension goes around the head circumference, and that has to stretch. So whichever way you want to think about that to help you remember it, I did put some notes in the video description box with the directions, so hopefully that helps. Then the shorter dimension going this way is the one that was cut along the lengthwise grain, so it has less stretch than this direction. Make sense? Great. Now, which side is the right side or the pretty side of the fabric? Be careful with AI, y'all, because there is so much information on the internet saying one thing, and I feel like it's just pulling the information from somewhere. I don't know. But when I look at fleece, I see this fuzzy side, and when I flip it over, it's like a smoother, slicker side. When I grab fleece fabric and I tug on it like this, do you see how it's rolling towards me? For me, fleece rolls towards the wrong side of the fabric. That means that this is the pretty side, okay? And you're gonna find mixed things on the internet. So be very careful, and instead of just like referencing like which side does fleece roll to? I mean, the first one, I think the Google AI thing that pops up tells you it goes to the pretty side. And I'm like, yeah, no, I don't know what fleece that is. The fleece I've always used curls to the wrong side. So be careful with that. And obviously look at your fabric and see what yours does, okay? And for something like this, like such a simple craft, if you like the way one side looks better than the other, or one, like some people like the fuzzier side here, which to me is the right side. Some people like this fuzzier, more textured side towards the inside, so it can be up against their head to keep them warmer. So really, you could do whichever side, just know that, as far as I'm concerned, when I pull fleece like this, it curls to the wrong side. So that means that this is the pretty side, and this is a direction that I'm gonna position my rectangle of fleece fabric facing up, okay? Then we're gonna bring the two short edges together, like this, okay? And when you do that, stop and look. Does this make sense? This is gonna go around my head. If you go like this, by mistake, before you sew, stop and ask yourself, does this make sense? For a hat that I'm gonna double fold up, does this make sense that this is the circumference of your head? Probably not. So these are quick things that you can stop and double check before you just kind of like blindly move on to the next step, and then think, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? So catch yourself, okay? When you turn this into a tube, make sure that it looks something like this, and you have something that makes sense, that's going to stretch around a kid's head, because I'm working with the kid size dimensions, okay? These two short sides come together, pretty sides touching, and then I'm gonna put some clips. You can use pins, I'm gonna use clips. Usually, y'all know me by now. If it's thicker, bulkier fabric or thicker layers, I'm usually gonna reach for my plastic sewing clips. If it was thin, fine fabric, I would usually pull my sewing pins out, okay? So now that we have it like this, we are sewing along this edge, but not the whole thing. So let's grab something to mark with. Let's see. Nancy says, does cotton spandex roll to the right side or to the wrong side? I don't have some here. I'm trying to think, because usually when I pull on it and I stretch on it, I use it for like drawstrings, and it usually curls to the wrong side. But let's see. Let's grab a piece of cotton spandex. This is cotton spandex. This is the pretty side. This is the wrong side. It rolls to the pretty side. Okay, so cotton spandex rolls to the pretty side. There you go. All right. Okay, good. So now, I like to measure from the top right corner, right? This side has a fold, this side does not. So that's why we brought it together to this side. So obviously, the side that's not on the fold are two loose ends that need to be sewn together or somehow connected, right? To create this tube. So from here down, I measure 3.5 inches. Some people go 5 inches. You can do whatever you want. If you're following my tutorial, go with 3.5. I find that that works good. So I'm using my boxes here as my measurements. Okay, this is 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 3.5. So my mark is right there. And you can go 4, 4.5. Remember that I came up with the dimensions this way that I think works good for the fringe, and it still gives you a good chunk so that you can double fold that brim. If you're only going to fold it once, or you're going to fold it once underneath and top stitch, then you have more room here in the height to play with. So if you wear it higher up on your head, just know that it's going to be a little bit floppier. And if you wear it lower down, you know, then you can adjust how wide that double folded brim is if you're going to go with that. Okay, so a lot of options. You got options for days. All right, so that's that. So for sewing, we start at that line that we just marked, right? I want to leave anything above this line unstitched for now. We're going to start here, back stitch, stitch straight down, and back stitch again. For this, because the fleece is a little bit bulky and I'm usually teaching kids when I'm making this, I don't want them to go with a super narrow 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I don't recommend you do that. If you're a quilter and you're teaching a kid to sew, give them a little bit more room. You can even go 1/2 inch seam allowance, because remember, whatever you're eating up here, it's still along the direction or direction of greatest stretch, like the degree of greatest stretch of the fabric. So you still have that built-in stretch to make up for whatever you ate up in the larger seam allowance to still stretch it over ahead comfortably, okay? So keep that in mind. But I think it's better than setting up a kid with like a 1/4 inch seam allowance and then they stitch it and they feel great and then you flip it over and you're like, yeah, you missed 4 inches here because the fabric slipped away from you, as can happen with bulky fabrics and beginner sewists, okay? So I'm just sharing with y'all my tips of how I get kids to successfully finish this thing, even if they can't sew straight. Just make sure that they're catching both layers. So my next tip for this, you don't have to dig through your thread stash and find a thread that perfectly matches, because guess what? It don't matter. If you're making a ton of these to give out for the holidays real quick, just like a boom, boom, quick make, it don't matter the thread color because, and I'll show you on this sample, the fleece is so puffy and thick that I used, and you know, for kids sewing machines, everybody, if they're doing different colored fleece hats, ain't nobody got time to be changing out the thread color for each kid on 2 sewing machines when you have like 20 kids, okay? So I used gray or a light cream colored. It didn't matter. If they were making it pink, navy blue, brown, gray, black, it don't matter. Because look, this is the same pink fleece, okay? If I pull on this, you still can't even see the stitches, okay? And we use the white thread. So, I mean, even like this, you can't tell the thread color. But I think on the end there where we backstitch, you can kind of see the little nugget of white thread, okay? So it don't matter. It really does not even matter. So I did go ahead and pull out a pink thread, but I wanted to show you that on white. And you can even see it if you don't believe me on a darker fabric. Here's a brown fleece, okay? What did we use? A light gray thread. You probably can't even see it. You definitely can't see it from here, even when it's stretched on the head. Do you see that? Don't worry about it, okay? Pick whatever's on the machine and keep it moving. All right, so now, even though the fabric stretches, are we gonna do a zigzag? No, because nobody has time for that. You know that when we do a lightning stitch or a really tight zigzag, it eats up more thread and it takes longer to stitch the seam. So I'm kind of walking y'all through everything that I do when I'm teaching a class. These are all the things that a teacher needs to have kind of like prepared and sorted out ahead of time so that you don't cut into class time. So for those of you that are thinking, I would like to teach kids, but I don't know where to start taking notes and jot your little things down of things where you're like, it's kind of like cutting corners, but really it's just making the class a little bit more efficient and cutting, you know, wasted time of stuff that can take a long time. Because if you have kids that are beginners as well, you know what happens sometimes. They forget to put the presser foot down. Sometimes they cut the thread super close. So they start stitching halfway down and then realize, hey, my needle has no thread, and you have to go in and rethread it. There's only so many times that you can rethread a machine before you really start cutting into your sewing time in the class, okay? So bigger seam allowance is going to help, and not worrying about the thread color, just have everybody use the same thread. So I am lining up the needle in the center position from this on this machine is 3/8 of an inch in from the edge of the universal presser foot. So that is what we're going to be using here, okay? So that's what I got. The stitch length, we're still, remember I said nobody has time to be doing zigzag stitches. You could if you wanted to, but it would have to be a really narrow zigzag, because if you go with a wide zigzag and you tug on this seam, and this is dark, apology, let me grab a lighter one so I don't have to keep adjusting the light on the camera. So a straight seam is going to give you a nice straight seam. I mean, a straight stitch is going to give you a nice straight seam. If you do a zigzag stitch, you know what happens, right? When you go like this, you will see the in and out of the zig and zag. And so you're not going to get a really clean seam. So if you do decide to go with a stretch stitch because you're thinking, no way, the stitches are going to pop, they're not going to. And the reason they're not going to is because the seam is running this way, and the hat is going to stretch this way. So you're not really stretching the seam in this direction to give it the kind of the yank that it needs for those stitches to pop, because the stitches are running perpendicular to where the fabric is stretching. So trust me on that one, they ain't gonna pop. Go with a straight stitch and keep it short and tight. So here we go. You can go anywhere from 2 to 2.5. Because the fleece is bulky, and again, it's a hat, I want it to really hold together, I prefer to go short, 2 millimeters, 2.2, in that range. You don't need to go shorter than that because, again, it's going to take you longer. And especially if you're teaching kids, don't go shorter than that. I would even go, I think when we do the classes with the kids, I go up to 2.4. Anybody want to take a wild guess why? I'm going to see how many people here have taught kids before, have taught beginners, and know what to do so they can save themselves extra work. Let's see. Heather says, I bet she's going to say you can use a universal needle and either 80 or 90 should be fine. And you are absolutely right, Heather, because I definitely have a universal size 80-12 needle in my sewing machine. You can absolutely do it. Even though the fabric stretches, this fleece, and this is like your anti-pill blizzard fleece, like the craft fleece that you can get at the big box stores, even though it stretches, it doesn't have built-in like spandex. This is more what we would call like a mechanical stretch. It's just in the way that the fabric is made, it tends to stretch along the crosswise grain, right? Because when you look at the end of the bolt, it usually just says 100% polyester. It doesn't say like 98% polyester, 2% spandex. That's more for your garment fleeces, right? The ones that are designed for like sweatshirts, that are like maybe activewear kind of stuff and things like that. This, yes, you can make hoodies. I've made plenty of hoodies with this type of a fleece, but because it's like a built-in stretch that the fabric itself has, I find that you don't really have to use a ballpoint needle or stretch. You can, but a universal is going to be fine. So I use a size 80-12. You can check it out. Like some of you may find that you might need to go up to the 90-14. And I'm just looking around here because y'all, like I said, I'm missing my Joann's. I wanted to have some neutral colored fleeces for the kids' classes that we were teaching. And one group was like younger kids that were, you know, they were all about like the bright, we had like a light blue color. But the middle schoolers, you know, they like to go probably a little bit more neutral. So we had like brown, navy blue. I was trying to find black. And I had to go to Walmart, y'all. And when I tell you this black fleece, like it is literally half the thickness of this other stuff from my stash that I had got at Joann's years ago, right? Half the thickness. I was so disappointed. I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, the hat, like, even following the same techniques, like the fringe didn't stay up too good. It was kind of like more of a floppy look, right? Which is fine too, but just be careful with the fleece that you're getting because if it's really, really thin, it's just going to be floppier and just doesn't give the same like fuzzy, puffy feel of, you know, the other stuff, okay? So all that to say, if I was doing it, you know, with that lighter, thinner fleece, you could absolutely get away with an 80-12. On this stuff, I still use a universal 80-12, but if you happen to have like a really good quality or you live in a super cold climate and you get your hands on some thicker fleece, then you can feel free to go up to a 90-14. Okay. Heather says, I think I will pre-cut the fabric for my machine embroidery class so they can focus on the coded embroidery and then just sew up the hats. And so you, my friend, are absolutely a teacher and thinking like a teacher, Heather. That is the easiest way. When I make this, when I have kids make these types of hats, you know everything is already pre-cut. I come with different stacks of different sizes. So I'll measure the kid's head and be like, okay, you're going with the smaller one. Pick one from this stack. Okay, yours is a little bit bigger, closer to an adult head circumference. Grab one from this stack. Because there is no way that you're going to have 18 kids sit there, cut out anything, because it ain't going to be accurately, right? In my room here, I can definitely cut it all up faster with a rotary cutter than they can with like making a template out of cardboard, tracing it around on the fleece, and then using scissors. Nobody has time for that. We're trying to get these kids sewing so that they can have a finished project. So yes, I would absolutely do that. And that's a great idea, Heather, where you can see, mind you, we didn't talk about this here, but I'm going to pop this out real quick before we sew. Because the hats are made from rectangular pieces of fabric, okay, it's important to note how it comes together. So remember I was saying when you fold it in half, this is going to go around the head. So you can use that the same way to sort out if you are going to do any type of hand or machine embroidery. I would absolutely do it when the hat is, well, when the non-made hat is still a piece of fabric like this, okay? So you can measure if you know you're gonna do a double folded brim, maybe go like that and estimate it, right? And then measure down the 3.5 inches and know, okay, from here up it's gonna be cut. So we don't wanna do any embellishing in that area because it's gonna be chopped up. And so in this area, you know, if you're going to have a motif for whatever holiday, a snowflake, letters, you know, if you're monogramming it or whatever you want to do, I would do it then before, okay, before we start sewing. And mind you, I'm pointing here, but this is not where you want to do it, okay? Because this, remember, is going to be the back seam. So you're going to go opposite this side. I would fold it in half, find this center point, open it up, and then do your faux brim like this so you have an idea. This is 3.5 inches, so this is the center front. So if you're going to embroider anything there, that's where it needs to be, okay? Okay, so let's move on. Here. This is a step that I do let the kids do. You know, I tell them pretty sides touching. The short ends, match them up as perfectly as you can and have them put clips. So that way they kind of at least get an idea of how we're going from two-dimensional material flat and making a three-dimensional object, right? Because we don't just want them hitting the foot pedal on the machine. I want them to start looking and thinking about how is this whole thing coming together. Once they see it done, even the ones that can't really grasp how it's being done, once it's a hat, they're like, oh. Once they can see the finished thing, then I find that most all of them will be like, that's how you do it. Yes. Okay, so we're starting at the mark, 3.5 inches down. I have a 2.4 stitch length. I'm going to shorten it. I was saying 2.4 for kids. Did anybody suggest my answer to my question? Let me look in here. Heather says she's in her 27th year of teaching middle school. Ooh, girl. Oh, I know you know. And middle school is not easy. She says, this is not my first go at this. That's exactly how it goes. So those of you that are thinking of maybe starting a little sewing school, you know, sometimes people are like, I want to teach kids, or the kids in my neighborhood are really interested. These are all the things that I would definitely recommend to save your sanity. Okay. So, hi, Demps Designs. Thanks for coming by this weekend to the market. It was great to meet you in person. All right, so I had asked the question earlier of why y'all think that I was saying to use more like a 2.4 stitch length if I'm teaching kids. I don't see any answers there, but I will tell you why. Yes, Maita says ripper. That's exactly right. Because if they do make a mistake or one of the layers moved away from them and we need to rip out stitches, it's a whole lot easier to rip out 2.4 millimeter length stitches than it is to pull out 1.5 millimeter. Okay, so that's why. So anywho, I'm going to go with 2.0 because I'm not going to need to do any ripping. I'm going to put my speed up. I was like, why is this so slow? Clearly this was for kids. So I go forward a couple, back a couple. You definitely want to back stitch at the beginning and ends. And then I just have them follow the edge of the presser foot there to give me a nice consistent 3/8 of an inch 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way down. And then we'll back stitch when we get to the bottom as well. So notice, because the fleece moves, I have to keep pulling this top layer over to keep matching it up. So this is going to be a good exercise for kids, even if they have clips or pins, to learn how to also help manipulate the fabric with their fingertips to get it to do what they need. So we're at the end and I'm back stitching. Yeah, that's it. So when it comes to sewing, that's the sewing. That's it. Unless you're going to decide to like tack down or top stitch the double folded brim. Okay, I trimmed off my threads. That's that. Now, I'm flipping it this way. Okay, this is where my mark was. I'm going to grab my rotary cutter, and I do this in class too. I cut the fringe for the kids. If you have older kids or you have more time or you need to stretch out a class, like class time, you need to stretch it out so they give them more to do, you can absolutely hand out scissors. They can share the scissors. I just find that it's not as consistent, especially when they don't even really know what they're doing. I recommend cutting the fringe at 3/8 of an inch to 1/2 of an inch wide. If you go much wider than that, it doesn't fringe as cute as this, okay? It'll still fringe, right? But it'll be like thicker chunks. And if the fleece is kind of thick and heavy, then it just, I don't know. I don't like the way it looks. I like it more to be like more little flecks of fringe, okay? So then I take my rotary cutter and it's still folded up, so I'm cutting through 2 layers at once. If you don't have a new blade on your 45 millimeter rotary cutter, feel free to use the 60, but be careful because the bigger the blade, the easier it is to cut further in with less work of your hand, and you don't want to go past this mark, okay? So if I'm cutting with this guy, I need to stop like right there before I go beyond the line. We don't want to start cutting into what is the body of the hat. The fringe gets all cinched up like this. So you want the fringe to be about the same length all the way, okay? If they're cutting with scissors, I would just carefully have them hold the fleece like this so that you still keep together the 2 layers. And then just with smooth cuts, and that's another one, smooth cutting so that they don't end up with super choppy. And look at that. I still ended up with a little bit of a bobble there. I much prefer the rotary cutter, preferably the 45 millimeter, because I don't even have to touch it and I can easily just look. If you're not good at eyeballing 3/8 of an inch or 1/2 of an inch with the rotary cutter, you can always put a ruler, okay, if you need to. I usually do like a good bit like that, and then I'll stop and kind of flatten the fleece because it is quite bulky, right? And it kind of moves on you. But keep your hands back. You don't want to slice your finger trying to hold it like right there while you're cutting. And then this always gives me an opportunity to tell the kids how dangerous it is to use this rotary cutter. And I tell them grown-ups chop their fingers with this stuff so that they, I mean, some of them are still going to be interested in using it, but I'm like, yep, this is definitely not for y'all. And then when you get to the fold here, okay, don't just leave it. I always open it up like this because you can see because there was a fold there, it's doubled up. So I will usually go in here with the scissors and just split that one in half so that I still get about the same width thickness for all of it, okay? So that's how that goes. So easy. Reach inside, flip it right side out, shake it so the fringe all hangs out, and then I center that seam down the middle like this, okay? If you do it down the side, you're going to have that raw seam on the brim on the one side. So I just always like to center it in the back so it looks a little more intentional. Okay, now we're going to turn it this way. And I cut another strip, okay? This one is a little bit longer because I cut it from a bigger chunk. But usually like a 10-inch or 11-inch piece is fine. Just a little piece that's about 3/4 of an inch tall by 10 or 11 inches is fine. And I make sure to cut it so that, again, the same way we did with our fabric, the longest dimension, which is the 10 or 11 inches, is running along the stretchiest grain line. Make sense? Because otherwise you're not going to be able to use it to tie this up. You'll see. I shake, 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 have them go like this. I put this here, and then we're going to drop this so that the bottom of the fringe, like right where the cuts end, is on top of that strip, okay? And then we just bring this whole thing together. Bring the two ends of the strip, an overhand knot, and see, because I cut the 10-inch direction along the stretchiest grain line, it allows me to stretch and keep pulling in from the inside so that I get a really good tight knot. That knot cannot be loose. Some of the kids, because they don't really know what the goal of it is, would tie like loosely just to hold. Once you put it on your head, if they do yank it down, it's just going to open up and you're going to have a big hole there where the fringe is, right? That's not what we want. We want to bring that top together super, super tightly so that it's like a fringe pom-pom and it's not going to open up and move on you. So once I do one super tight like that, I'll just do another overhand knot and cinch it up nice and tight. There. I'm not yanking on the ends here because this is cut with the stretchiest direction. It's already going to get skinnier like you see it happening here where I initially pulled it. So I just pull closer and closer and closer so that when I get to here, it's going to be longer than the rest of your fringe. All you need to do, and this is a job I give to the kids, I have scissors on the side and I tell them once I tie it, I tell them go ahead and cut the long tails so that they match the rest of the fringe. And so that gives them an opportunity to kind of gauge just with their eyeball. We're not taking out rulers or measuring, and they can kind of feel confident cutting somewhere knowing that, you know, I mean, me knowing that if they cut a little bit shorter or longer, it's not going to matter, but it gives them a chance to kind of slow down and focus on what they're doing for that moment, okay? And that's it. So there's the hat. You can open up in here if you cinched it up super tight like I do and just kind of give it a little bit more of a round like this. It's weird to do when it's flat like this, but once you put it on, you can see that it basically comes together because we have the round circumference there. We have the little pom-pom flop at the end, and this is the kid size one, by the way. And then you can do your double folded brim. Okay? So again, you could go in here and like measure accurately and say, okay, we're going to do 2 folds of 1 inch each. So you would fold it 1 inch, fold it another inch, put clips all around, and you can do some top stitching there. Okay, for that top stitching, I would recommend doing something like a zigzag stitch because now instead of the stitches going vertically, remember I said the stitches are not going to pop because we're not stretching it in this direction, even though we use the straight stitch. This is the direction that stretches. So if you top stitch this with a straight stitch around the circumference and they stretch it onto their heads, you run a very, very high likelihood that them stitches are going to pop. So across the top there, do something that has maybe like a slanted, narrow zigzag stitch that's like a little bit wider, that has more give, so that that doesn't keep unrolling like this if you do want to just have it set with that double folded brim. Okay? Lynette says this cannot be any easier. I agree. Yes. So let's see. Marnie's saying, what thread does it have to stretch? What thread does it have to stretch? Does that mean what thread to use that can stretch? I use a polyester thread, 100% polyester, because a synthetic thread is going to be a lot stronger than a synthetic thread is going to be a lot stronger than a natural fiber thread like cotton. So I definitely would recommend a polyester for here. Okay. If you don't have polyester thread, this seam is not getting a lot of stress, so you can absolutely get away with cotton. But if you are planning to do any stitching around the circumference and you know it stretches in that direction and you want it to hold longer, you absolutely should use a polyester thread so that the stitches, you know, will last longer and they're not going to pop as easily as if you did some type of or used a cotton thread in this area. Okay. So yeah, so easy. I mean, y'all, it cannot get any easier. And like I said, some kids even like to wear it like that without double folding the brim up. It's so easy. So easy. All right. Let me see if I have any questions here. Yes, Heather says that three-dimensional thinking is so important for kids. Agreed. Agreed. Brenda says you could use a cute button. Remember, you could do so much in this area. You could even, let me see, potentially stitch another piece of fabric here and then flip it so that the seam is fully concealed within the two fabrics and like tuck under the top edge of a little strip here. Because I'm trying to think of, you know, other ways that you can save the amount of fleece, right? If we're doing a double folded fleece, that's really like two hats in one, and that can get pretty pricey, even though the fleece is pretty affordable. But if you need a lot of projects quickly, I mean, you saw the size of the rectangle from, I can't remember, let me think. The fleece is super wide, so it's like 58 inches wide, and I'm trying to think, I think I cut 13 and a half, like for the kid size, it's a strip of 13 and a half inches this way across the 60, and I was able to get two of the kid sizes and then one more of like a smaller kid size, like a kindergartner kind of, you know? So I went ahead and did that, and that way I didn't have any waste. Any little scrap pieces that you have left over, like say like this kind of stuff where it's not quite long enough and it's more like a square, these were the pieces that I would use to find the stretchiest direction, not this one, right? And then cut those little 10-inch strips so that they could tie it up with, right? So 10 inches by 3 1/4, and then I would just cut it like that from the pieces that were a little bit smaller. So super, super easy. Let's see, this project was so easy for me. Thank you so much for this instructional video. I have lots of fleece I purchased from Joann's before the closure. Thank goodness. Girl, you got lucky. You absolutely got lucky. I mean, we've done fleece crafts with kids for like a decade, you know, but I didn't have all the colors. You know how they came in like all these fun prints and licensed things? I'm like, dang it, I should have saved more. All right. So yeah, I just wanted to share that quickie make with y'all. I may even do like a standalone tutorial just because, oh my gosh, the video has almost 1 million views in a week. So I feel like a lot of people out there are either teaching kids or are looking for quickie makes like that where you know you don't have to buckle down and spend 6 months working on a quilt. And especially with the cold months still here, and for some of you getting colder, I think this is a great little make, okay? For pictures, for whatever, you know, little holiday themed parties, you can do anything with this, okay? So hopefully y'all enjoyed that tutorial. Thanks for your great questions. Thanks for tuning in. Let's see. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, Devaraya, maybe. She's asking, what dimensions would you recommend for 6-year-olds? So for a 6-year-old, it would be like probably a little bit loose on them. The dimensions that I put at the top for the kids measurement, which was 13 and a half by 20. So maybe for like a 5-6-year-old, I would go a little bit smaller. I would maybe still keep the height, do it maybe 13 inches by 19. Something like that I think would work fine. Okay? And just check on your fleece because, you know, not all fleece is created equally. So if you have a fleece and say you have different fleece chunks in your stash, if you see that one really stretches and another one barely stretches even along the crosswise grain, then you know you're probably going to have to make a few adjustments in terms of the dimensions because they won't all stretch or not stretch the same. Like even just off of this pink stretches a little bit more, I think, than this brown one. Like it's a little bit, because it's thicker, right? It's a little bit denser, and so it stretches just a little bit less. So try to, if it stretches less, get closer to the actual head circumference, and that way you won't be asking the fabric to stretch that much more, right? You don't want them to start getting a headache because it fits super tight either. All right. Okay, well, thank you everybody for tuning in. That is going to be it. There will not be a WIP Wednesday episode next week, and neither the next week after that, because the week after that is Christmas Eve. Oh,
Next week is Christmas.
yeah. So the next one. So I'm gonna miss y'all for 2 weeks, and then I'll be back for Christmas Eve. Hey, New Year's Eve. Yeah. So we'll do a WIP Wednesday on New Year's Eve. Okay. All right. Absolutely. Carla says, do you think this is doable for seniors? Yes. I haven't been able to try it out with my senior citizens yet for the monthly craft classes, because the November and December classes, we don't do crafts in those months because it's always, we do classes like the 4th Thursday of the month. And so the 4th Thursday usually lands in a week of a holiday or something here. And so we haven't done these, but thinking about this, absolutely. I think all my senior citizens in the craft classes I teach them would absolutely be able to do this, because there's really only one seam. So if you show up with the stuff pre-cut, I just wouldn't add on the cutting, either for kids or for seniors, right? I would definitely bring the stuff pre-cut for them. And then just, I mean, they're only sewing one seam. Even if that seam is a little bit wonky, and I'll mention this again, the same way I told you that it doesn't matter what thread color you use, okay, because they're not gonna see it since the fabric is puffy, that also applies to slightly wonky seams. Obviously, if the seam is like an S, you're gonna see it, but they could still wear the hat. Okay, but if it's like a little bit off and a little bit whatever, all you need to do is really like trim up the seam allowance, so that when this double folded up part, if you're leaving it raw like that, you don't want to have like a huge seam allowance on one side and a little bit on the other. So you can just trim that up to clean it up, but otherwise they're still going to have a finished hat, you know. And then I think that would be a good exercise even for seniors to do with some, just make sure they're sharp scissors, because when you're cutting through the polyester fleece, you know, you can't be cutting that stuff with a dull blade or with dull scissors or shears. I would make sure they have some sharp scissors, and then have them sit there and cut their fringe, and you know, then you're just tying 2 little knots and you're good to go. All right, so thank you everybody for tuning in. Yes, happy holidays to everybody. I will see y'all at the end of this month for another episode of WIP Wednesday, and I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. Remember that the sewing machine that I used on today's show is on sale. We have a few left in stock. Make sure to use the link in the description box below, because it is currently on sale. That is the Juki LB5020 that y'all have seen me use here on WIP Wednesdays for the last 5 years. And I have hundreds of hundreds of videos where I'm using it. And I have like 3 solid tutorials that are like reviews and overviews and how to use the machine and all that kind of stuff. So if you go ahead and make that purchase, then you know you have access to those resource videos that can help walk you through anything you want to make with this machine. And I do sew everything on this. Y'all have seen me, from lightweight tissue knit fabrics to the fleece that we just sewed, quilted projects, bag making, and all of that. Okay, so if anybody's looking for a gift for themselves, or for someone who's looking to maybe upgrade from a really base level machine that gives them nothing but problems, if you don't want to have to deal with troubleshooting the machine, I definitely recommend the Juki LB5020, and we do have it in stock right now. So thanks again everybody for tuning in, and I will see y'all in the next video. Bye-bye.